Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I'm David. I'm with Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. I'm our natural resource technician too. Long name, long agency name. And yeah, we've got a lot of our properties are fairly stinkwort free, being areas that have had a low impact, low human impact on the land. And where we do find them, we're very successful using mostly hand pull methods to remove them. And I wish I was talking to you about those areas today. However, I'm not. I'm talking to you about some newer properties we've acquired, managed for our partners have acquired that we help manage in the valley floor in Santa Clara County. This is towards the central center of the county on the southern side of San Jose itself, as you're going down south on Santa Teresa Boulevard, if you're familiar with that area. These areas are large, open, former agricultural properties that have had quite a bit of different impacts, some of which I'll talk about here, but they also host a lot of sensitive aquatic habitats. I'm specifically talking about this site as sort of a case study in working in a sensitive habitat against this specific weed here for stinkwort. Yeah, so I'm going to try to keep this fairly light. I'm going to try to keep it fairly short. A lot of this will be familiar from people's previous talks. Hopefully, there's something helpful for you in here when you're making your decisions for managing stinkwort in a sensitive site. So the big picture here, what you're seeing, I know we've seen a lot of pretty pictures of stinkwort today, and here it is again, a nice close-up. And in the background is a terrain feature called Spreckles Hill. That's also the name of this property. All right, so real quick, I'm going to go over just some quick rehash, not too much since we've covered it pretty well. So stinkwort as an annual plant grows and dies in one season. It's got that different season to a lot of our other plants, that sort of later summer where you see it more mature and then seeding and blooming and seeding in September through December. And it's resistant to herbicides in large part due to the fact that it has all those sticky resins that the plant produces. It's also prodigious. Each plant can produce thousands of seeds, and roughly 90% can germinate when dispersed, as we've seen from other talks, and can mature on the plant as well if you've pulled a plant that's already flowering and left it on the ground. The seed bank, Miranda's doing great research to help us learn more about the seed bank of this plant. Previous documentation had quoted like 3 to 5 years. Some people have, as we've heard, encountered seed banks they think may be laying dormant longer. So that's just some quick background. Again, more pretty pictures of it, both at the flowering stage and after its seeds are starting to disperse. All right, so here's our site. This site is located at Bailey and Santa Teresa Boulevard, south side of San Jose, if anyone's familiar with that area. If you're not, it's as you're exiting Highway 101 on that south side of San Jose. This site's an 8 acres area. It historically was a contiguous wetland with the wetland known as Laguna Seca, which is just to the north of the map that you see here. It has been used for a lot of different purposes. What you see on the map, the shaded area representing where our stinkwort and treatment area is, that also is roughly equivalent, the same as where a large amount of fill soil is brought in when this area is being developed back in the 1990s. The fill soil is about 4 feet deep of non-native material, fairly fine grained with some aggregates mixed in, and highly compacted. So basically think almost like cement soil here. It's very dense soil, very difficult to work in. However, the stinkwort has found a niche there just fine. So that's the sort of area we're looking at. The area of the historical wetlands shaded in blue, that's how the extent of where we still have that native wetland soil that would have previously covered the whole area. So this area is habitat for native plants such as the tules and narrowleaf milkweed, as well as many others. Those are just our most charismatic ones there. It hosts numerous passerine birds. It's important stopover habitat for migratory birds, as well as birds that we'll see more year-round, like your red-winged blackbirds and tricolored blackbirds. This site also hosts some nesting raptors. This will become important when I talk about some of the restrictions and why this is a sensitive site. So approximately 4 acres of this are jurisdictional wetlands as defined by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. which it has some importance in why this is defined as a sensitive site. The stinkwort itself covers now about 10 acres of dense monoculture. There are smaller outlying patches and edge effects as well. The wetland itself, the area shaded in blue, also hosts about maybe a 10 to 15%, or hosted a 10 to 15% coverage of stinkwort prior to our treatments. So we've been working in this area for about 3 years, since about 2021. The restrictions at the site, us as an agency in our IPM manual, we've given ourselves, we have a restriction of 15 feet from wetlands for use of herbicides. That's our general policy. That policy is in part informed by different restrictions set by the County Agricultural Commissioner's Office, state agencies, and federal agencies. One of which that most of you are probably familiar with is the California red-legged frog injunction buffers. U.S. Fish and Wildlife and EPA identified areas of critical habitat for California red-legged frog, as well as areas that are habitat, but not necessarily critical habitat. Those are called the non-critical habitat areas. And within there, there's some different definitions for what's the breeding habitat, non-breeding habitat, and upland habitat, each one of which has a different buffer ranging from 400 feet from any of the features listed as critical habitat, all the way down to 60-foot buffers for features within non-critical habitat, and under certain circumstances, that 15-foot buffer for a agency with a weed control program and a qualified applicator, such as our situation. For this site, it falls within the restrictions of 15 feet from any wetland features. Yes, we also have restrictions for nesting birds. Herbicides must not be used within 15 feet of birds of nesting bird habitat, or within 150 feet of raptor nests. That comes from our IPM manual. So those are some of the reasons why our management here, we have selected to use non-herbicide treatment methods. Even though some of this area could potentially fall outside of some of those buffers, out of an abundance of caution and out of practicality, we've decided to go with to treat the whole area as a sensitive site. All right, so this is what the site looks like. Looking into it in the dry season, this is in summer. You can spot the stinkwort in here. There's also other non-invasive species, such as there's some mustard, that's the yellow one in the center. There's some bristly oxtongue, but then you'll see that little Christmas tree sort of in the shade of the willow tree. That's one of our stinkwort plants there. If you look closely at the image, you'll see more and more of them around that area. So that's sort of what you're looking at in the wetland pre-treatment in the dry season. On the next slide, we've got see what it looks like when you do get a good rain year. We've got features here to help retain more water longer, which means this will be even more critical to treat this as a sensitive site as we retain more of that water. You see some of the residents here are monarch butterfly, a red-winged blackbird, and a female common yellowthroat. She doesn't look much like a yellowthroat, as strikingly as the males do, but that's the only photo I could get. All these photos are from the site, so you can tell it's a very rich area in terms of habitat that it hosts. All right, so the reasons why we select not to use herbs, let me back up on that. Some of the challenges with herbicides, even where you are using it for stinkwort, are right here. You've got a good option with transline and milestone, as a lot of us have talked about. However, the timing can be difficult. So that's one thing to consider. A lot of our treatment regimes don't overlap with stinkwort. So if we were to use milestone as a pre-emergent in one area, we may not be able to come back and use it again for specifically for stinkwort. Restrictions on locations, as I mentioned, are buffers that we have. The native species that are hosted at a site can restrict your use of herbicide. The stinkwort's own resistance to herbicide once it's at a mature state, and those timing with, like I mentioned, the timing with other target plants. So some of the methods that we use here and some of the challenges, this is where I'll go in more of like a little case study, giving you our lessons learned, and hopefully it's helpful to you in your decisions. Hand removal is our primary method here. We utilize, like I said, this is a large patch. You're talking 10 acres. Normally that's a little larger than you and I would think about for hand pulling stinkwort. Since this is an area where we have the luxury of being able to devote a lot of resources, we primarily utilize this method. Our volunteer corps is fairly robust. And what we found is that if we can get about 3 events of up 15 to 20 people per year, we can do a pretty good job of containing this patch. The advantage of it is that you can remove the whole plant using either just their hands, gloved hands, tools like some of the ones we've talked about, horis, weed wrenches, and cutting devices such as road hose and other hand tools. Really anything you've got that the volunteer is comfortable with. The variety of hand tools allows volunteers to pick what works best for them. If your plants are already going to the flowering stage, you do have the ability to bag those plants here. Again, I want to note that that's the flowering stage. Once the seeds are actually starting to get to that fluffy stage, you're a little bit too late for bagging. You're probably going to do more spreading of the seeds than, more bad than good if you try to do that. So that's some of the advantages. The challenges with our hand crews, it's time consuming. Like I said, large groups are needed, multiple visits are needed. Large groups are difficult to gather regularly. It puts a lot of strain on your volunteer corps. The plants can be irritant to some people. Sticky resins accumulate readily on your gloves, on your tools, on your vehicles, and that can be a maintenance issue. And like I said, on average, 2 to 4 groups, 15 to 20 volunteers are needed for maintaining containment of a 10 to 15 acre site. This picture right here shows an example of a year we did end up having to bag. That's a lot of bags. We ended up bagging 70 large contractor bags that year. These are our lessons learned with that. Smaller plants are more numerous per square foot than one large plant that has shaded out others. Mature plants are less likely to snap the root. There's less time in the growing season for new germination if you pull plants later in their growth stage. Pulling too early, you're going to have to return to the site. There will be resprouts. And then plants can be discarded on site if you've gotten there before flowering. So that's sort of where we run the gauntlet to try to get the plants after they've had enough time to mature, less time in their growing season left, but before they've gone to seed. It's a narrow window, but if you do it right, it can be a pretty efficient way. We've also used hose and chopping tools. And as other people have mentioned, you want to make sure that you're getting below the surface of the soil there to prevent having a little bit of your plant left that can still regrow, sprout new leaves, go to seed. Here's just an example of some of the work we did. This is the second year in. You saw that dense patch in the first photo. This is that same patch the following year after extensive hand treatment. This is the results of the hand treatment of that year prior to flowering. These ones could be disposed of on site. And then this is some more examples of what utilizing your volunteers actually looks like on the ground for these sizes of plant or sizes of patches. You see the bottom, both the bottom right and the top left photos show the plants in the actual edge zone between the fill soil and the wetland itself, where the critical habitat is. Here's another photo of the year we had to bag, an example of how time consuming that can be, how it is doable, but it is an additional burden with or challenge with hand removal. Volunteers love it, so that's at least a positive. You see the gentleman on the left has what's it called? Weed wrench. The weed wrench is very effective on larger plants. All right, mechanical treatments have their own issues as well. Some challenges. You can mow we have areas here where we can mow. We don't do it a lot because our mowing equipment and anything with moving parts will gum up rather rapidly and requires a lot of maintenance to get that cleaned off. The sticky resins usually break down best with an alcohol-based cleaner. So our equipment operator has recommended that if we're going to mow it earlier in the season and then come back later for smaller plants. However, being aware that you'll need multiple treatments due to the fact that they're fairly short-statured and mowers can only get so close to the soil. There's also weed eaters. Weed eaters can get close to the soil. You still have that same issue where in a dense patch with enough treatment, those moving parts are going to get jammed up by the resins. This is going to put some maintenance issues on your tools. All right, yeah. Some other things we'd like to try in the future that we haven't got to try yet. I'm interested in trying steamers for steaming soil seed banks as well as, well, yeah, primarily for destroying seed banks. It's something I haven't got to try yet. I would like to try. It involves high pressure steam underneath a tubing system covered by a tarp that sealed the surface of the ground. We are also waiting to see, as we retain more water in this wetland, if having longer periods of inundation itself can help to control the plant. For other plants, if you can keep an area filled to a depth of about 6 inches for 2 to 4 weeks out of the year, you can reduce the plant's ability to grow and throughout its season. I'll let you know as this project develops if we see a reduction in stinkwort in areas where we have long-term inundation, not just seasonal wetness from rain. That's what I've got. Not very heavy. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, David. Question?
Yes, there are 3 questions on Zoom right now.
Let's do the first question.
Okay. Is the raptor buffer only during nesting season or year round?
Yes, that's a good thing to mention. Those buffers are for during the nesting season. So let's see, we have a specific date range in our IPM manual for when we'll make surveys to check for nesting birds. But yeah, if a nesting bird is discovered, that's when the buffer goes into effect.
Is there a question in the room?
You mentioned Crotch's bumblebee. Do you know if it uses a stinkwort at all? Or I know it's a generalist, so.
That would be a great question. We do have Crotch's bumblebee in the area. They were found recently on surveys by one of our partner agencies. However, I do not know of any. I don't know of many species that do use stinkwort. I think that'd probably be a good question for someone here that I'd love to know the answer to as well.
Go ahead with online.
The next question online is, to what extent do you have to disturb the roots in larger and smaller plants?
Disturbing the roots of the stinkwort plant?
Yes.
So if you're doing whole plant removal, in this site, the roots aren't terribly extensive in the fill soil. They only get to a couple of inches. In the wetland itself, it's more like the stinkwort you'll see in other areas where you've got about 6 to 8 inches of root. If you're doing a removal method with a chopping tool, like a rogue hoe, if you can get to about 1/2 inch below the surface of the soil, you'll probably still see about 25% resprouting, but dramatically less than if you were to chop above the surface of the soil. So about 1/2 inch underneath the soil has been good success.
Another question from the room?
Just about your volunteer base. You mentioned they enjoy it. Do you see much burnout from your volunteers, and is there a need for new recruitment?
That is a great question. So volunteers are probably one of your best tools if you can get a good volunteer coordinator who can keep your volunteers engaged and keep recruiting more. Our volunteers tend to be about 50 to 75% long-term returning volunteers. We get about 25% turnover each year of new people who maybe come for a few events and then don't come back. With these events, with stinkwort, it's strangely attractive to folks. It's got a small, it's got a narrow window throughout the year, about, a couple months where we're actually actively polling. And in that, about 3 to 4 events at this site. So the folks who get there, for stinkwort specifically, they don't usually reach the burnout threshold. However, overall, if your volunteer corps is doing a lot of different things and a lot of different repeat activities, you can get burnout from that. That can draw away from people who have time to come to the stinkwort events. So it's good to, if you can, cultivate like corporate groups or other groups specifically for your stinkwort who aren't going to be pulled in other directions that might get them burnt out. For instance, we annually have a couple corporate groups who like to come back specifically for our stinkwort pulls.
Last question from Zoom.
All right, one last question. Does steaming run the risk of killing good seeds too?
Say again?
Does steaming run the risk of killing the good seeds too? Is that a concern?
Steaming is, when you're making your decisions for which control method you're going to use, one of the things you balance out is what other plants are present, native plants, rare plants, things that you want to reduce damage to. If I were to use steam soil sterilization, wow, that's a mouthful. I'd select that for areas that are dense monocultures of just stinkwort, since I know there that I won't have anything else to damage, because yes, steam, similar to solarization and similar to other broadcast methods, does affect everything within that area, including in the case of soil sterilization and solarization, depletion of native microbacteria in the soil itself. So that's a consideration to take in with the size of your patch, the extent of your infestation.